Sure, go.
Hey, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. We've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. A lot of good stuff here as we have Big Jeff's insights, his storylines, his top 10 storylines going on in the Big Ten this season. It's going to be things for you to look for, to track a little bit. And as always, we'll be mentioning as many Big Ten teams as we possibly can. So look out for this one. A lot of Big Ten teams mentioned. And we even have an announcement to get to here in a moment. But before we do that, please do like, subscribe, help us out. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a comment. If you're on podcast, give us a 5-star review. Follow us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. We really appreciate everybody doing that. Helps the show, helps it get more noticed out there. And let's be honest, we gotta defeat these dirty SEC podcasts that keep touting how good the SEC is. Okay, listen, even if you don't think the Big Ten is better, still needs some Big Ten podcasts out there. All right, so like, subscribe, help us out. We appreciate you doing that. You can also find us on podcasts Monday through Friday, every morning posted there, and then on YouTube Sunday, Tuesday, and then Big Jeff Insights on Thursday night at 9 p.m. I'm, of course, joined by the one, the only, Big Jeff with us here. Big Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Things are heating up, and more than one as we approach the season here. For me, my upstairs air conditioning is not working, so it's really heating up for me tonight. But I have a fan blowing on me. We have a great topic, so very excited to be here, JR.
Glad to have you here. All right, so quick announcement. As most of you know, we did partner with Believe, and our podcast is now part of the Believe Network. Well, really cool news. Believe has now entered into a partnership with FanDuel. This isn't supposed to be announced until Friday, but since we're posting this podcast on Friday, you guys get a little bit of a sneak peek, as I know you were just so itching to know this information. So what that basically means is the only betting odds, anything like that, we're going to be using our FanDuel. You'll see that on social media. You'll see that here on YouTube, the podcast, you'll hear it there. So it doesn't really impact all that much with what we do here, other than we will be referencing the betting odds more. And even though I'm not a big bettor, you might get some thoughts from me on, maybe I'll win you some more money or something like that. If I do, let me know, because maybe I should start winning myself some money. But but we have Jeff with a update on your son. Jeff, let the people know an update on your son before we get into the episode.
Yeah, I'm not going to assume everyone knows, but my youngest boy, rising junior in Georgia here. I live in a suburb of Atlanta, Alpharetta, Georgia. He was on track to probably be a starting receiver for us this year, but in a 7-on-7 tournament over the summer, while making a diving touchdown catch, he broke his collarbone when the guy guarding him landed on top of him after the catch was made. And we were devastated to find out, it wasn't like a 6 to 8 week healing break. It was 4 to 6 months, according to the doctor, to completely return back to a contact sport like football. So we had a 6-week follow-up last Friday. He was kind of expecting bad news because the shoulder didn't look any better right from the outside. So he's thinking, man, maybe this season's toast. But instead, JR, we got good news. The doctor said, took an x-ray, said some of the best healing he's ever seen for an injury like that, and that he really believes Preston will be able to play the second part of the season, or the back half of the year. So we're very excited. He's worked very hard, a lot of weightlifting, protein shakes, all that good stuff to play. You all know high school football in Georgia is something serious, right? And so we're just excited, though, to have the potential to play. And so he's really got a kind of a pep to his step now. And we have our first scrimmage game this Friday. So things are getting real in Georgia when it comes to high school football. Practices started last week, and they're off and running.
Very good, very good. Well, we are so happy for your son, and sounds like he's got some good healing genes. Hopefully, he got those from you. As I'm sure, Jeff, you were such a good healer back in the day. Well, what am I saying? You're still a good healer, right? Okay, not back in the day. Not referencing that. All right. Anyway, but we're happy to hear that, Jeff. Thanks for the update. Do you want to get to a couple chats, and then we will get on with the episode? We got Brian Myers here. Brian, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Billy Tuesday saying football soon. Football soon indeed, Billy. Less than 30 days away. It's a great time great time. And Zach, he says, I expect much more data-driven analysis now that Jeff is here. Yeah, Jeff always bringing the data for us. Not as data heavy tonight with the storylines, but I'm sure you'll have some data as always, right, Jeff?
I will. That
There we go.
pretty much summarizes well there, JR. Yep.
There we go. All right, well, let's get into the first storyline. Oh, wait, hold on 1 second. 1 second. Got Yankee with us. Yankee says good game on Big Ten Network right now. Might want to watch on mute. If it's good game to you, Yankee, I don't know if it's a good game to me. I think you might be referencing an Ohio State-Michigan game that I might not want to tune in for. If that's the case, then yeah, I'll stay here and listen here. And Pit Snipe Husker here as well. Good to see you, Pit Snipe. All right. Jeff, storyline.
Hey, before you put that up, go back, take it off. All right, so just want a couple things. First of all, these 10 storylines have a full write-up already right now on bigjeffsfootball.com. So that's already been done, so go there to read about it. And then this is really setting the stage for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to give my predictions for the records of all Big Ten teams. Now, I know Zach and JR did that exercise in the last week here. So I'm going to do that in 2 different parts. I'm going to cover 9 teams each over the next 2 weeks. And as usual, going to have a lot of background data behind the reasoning behind that. I'll also highlight any major differences I have with Zach and JR. So this will set the stage for that. And then before we get into this, just, top storylines, just to say, going into the 2023 season, a debate about who's the best football conference in America wasn't even a debate. I mean, there was no doubt it was the SEC. Georgia was back-to-back champions. They had won 13 of the 17 prior national championships. And the only team since 2002 who had won a title was the 2014 Ohio State team. So, but things are much different now, right? Back-to-back titles, Michigan and Ohio State. Last year, first year of the 12-team playoff. The Big Ten got 4 teams in, most of any conference. SEC only got 3 in. And so there's no doubt the ACC and the Big 12 lag far behind both the SEC and the Big Ten across any data dimension you look at. So now today we can have a legitimate conversation on who is the best conference. And so my 10 storylines are mostly kind of focused around that, right? Like who's going to be in the playoffs, who's going to chance to win the national championship, because those are the big drivers of defining who is the best conference. So I'm saying there's 3 things driving what's the best conference. Number 1, who wins the national championship? Like what conference has the national champ? Who has the most teams in the playoffs? And then how those teams look and how far they go in the playoffs. Those are the 3 biggest drivers of things. And so that's kind of like the setting the stage, I guess, of the background on what the top 10 storylines are, because there's certainly more than 10, right? I mean, I even had several that didn't make the cut. So really it's the impact here of, helping to define, is the SEC better or the Big Ten better as we go through each of these. All right.
Well, I know where I stand on the issue, but we'll hear from you, Jeff. Everybody hears me yap about it enough. We'll hear from you. Storyline number 1, go for it.
So can the Big Ten get another 4 teams in the playoffs and win a 3rd straight Natty, which might catapult them to truly be able to claim that they're better than the SEC? So, I think if the Big Ten does win 3 in a row, probably almost anyone other than maybe Paul Feinbaum would at least be able to say at a minimum the top of the Big Ten is better than the top of the SEC if we win 3 in a row, right? I mean, think we would all agree to that. And then it's going to become a discussion on depth, right? And so, they're not the challenge is there's not enough Big Ten versus SEC matchups to really monitor that. And it used to be the case, well, once we got into bowl season, we did get a good number of SEC and Big Ten matchups. But the issue is, in today's environment, we have opt-outs for people not wanting to, hurt their stock in the NFL draft, or we might even have people transferring before the bowl even happens. So it does make, bowl games a less better predictor of who's the better conference. And it's why I say that how many teams we get in the playoffs, and then how they do. And hopefully they'll have direct head-to-head competition against the SEC in the playoffs, because no one can say, well, X SEC team wasn't motivated against the Big Ten team. If you're in the playoffs, you're about as motivated as you can get. So that eliminates that as an excuse. So I'm just saying I'm listing this as the biggest storyline here, JR. Like, if we want to be considered better than the SEC, winning it and then getting the most in and having them do well is going to be the driver of defining who's the best conference. Any thoughts on that, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are the Big Ten is already the best conference, in my opinion. I know that Paul Feinbaum has a hard time accepting that, but we've covered him before on here. He typically has no ability to actually think through what's going on. I don't know if you heard, he had somebody on his show the other day where he was talking about how, the Big Ten, they can't even talk about non-conference games. The SEC, they play 9, sometimes 10 Power 4 teams. Are you kidding me? And I thought, yeah, the Big Ten plays 9, sometimes 10 Power 2 teams. Are you kidding me? Right? And then you look at the Big Ten in the playoffs. The Big Ten has not lost to another conference, not to the SEC. The Big Ten, current Big Ten teams have not lost to another conference the past 2 years in the playoffs. That's what happens when you try to match up a Big Ten team and an SEC team thinking they're going to lose and then have them play another Big Ten team there in the playoffs. I don't know if they did that on purpose, but I like to say they did. So I hear what you're saying. If you're going to talk about who's going to be the next conference, the best conference this next year, right? But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think ESPN, I'm with Billy here, I don't think ESPN or anybody over there at those SEC networks are ever going to admit the Big Ten is better. They're just going to keep coming up with excuses, keep coming up with this, that, and the other, and act like, strength of schedule. When in reality, PFF says the strength of schedules are actually harder in the Big Ten than the SEC. But the SEC doesn't like to talk about that.
I do think the ESPN is talking better about the Big Ten because they have to. I mean, if you've got the national champs.
Yeah, they're talking better about them. Yeah.
One thing I do think it's interesting about the conversation about non-conference game, no matter what side you're on, the people who quote it, they only show the teams that support their view. Like, the SEC will show Indiana's schedule. No one talks about Iowa playing Iowa State every year and Ohio State typically having some mega game. And the opposite happens the other way. It's like they're only showing the portion that suits their argument, which totally goes against what Big Jeff believes. By the way, fans, I'm not here. I want to know what the data shows me, right? Now, I rely on the look test as well, but really, data rules the day. And the data the last couple of years gives a strong argument that you can make an argument that the Big Ten is better. I just don't think it's a definitive, and I want to see more sample sizes, I think, is the key, JR, right? It's great to have 2. If you can get that 3, it's like it's going to be pretty hard to argue against it, unless beyond the champion, everyone else is getting beat up by SEC teams. That would be the only thing that could kind of support that. But all right, let's go to number 2.
Let's reference the odds really fast to give people some thoughts there. So the odds presented by FanDuel, really there are only 3 teams in the Big Ten right now that are slated to make the playoffs. That's Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. Michigan is the next team out at 205, USC 470, Indiana 530. Illinois 540, Nebraska 630, Iowa 730, Washington 920. Everybody else is 1,000 or plus 1,000 or higher. Jeff, that doesn't bode well for getting 4 teams into the playoffs, as Vegas normally knows what they're talking about a little bit.
Yes, but of all those teams that are under 1,000, under plus 1,000, one of them is going to surprise, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. I mean, I think that's kind of some of the key storylines. I mean, Indiana came out of literally nowhere, but these other teams, they're not going to be coming out of nowhere to do it, right? I don't think anyone would be shocked based on, for example, how much talk Illinois has gotten this season, right? Would it be a shock for them to make the playoffs? I mean, they were 10-3 last year. That's not a shock. Indiana, to steal from my thunder later, They were 2-10 the prior year. First year coaching staff. What they did is pretty incredible to become that fourth team.
Certainly. All right, we can get to storyline number 2 now. Storyline number 2, Jeff.
So the question is it really natty or bust this year for Penn State and James Franklin like it was for Ohio State last year? And I've heard some people say that, right? I could say the college football media, I think, I hear Penn State as the name that most people cite as the favorite Big Ten team to win the Natty. I know, as you just showed, though, Vegas, FanDuel, Ohio State is the favorites to win the Natty. This is different than yours was showing making
that's
the playoffs.
I can look up favorite to win the Natty really fast.
Yeah, and I've got the 2 data points. So just the top 2, Ohio State to win the Natty is plus 650. So they're the favorite over Penn State. But Penn State's not that far behind, plus 750. So they're second there. Well,
Ohio State's the favorite in the Big Ten. Texas is the favorite overall at plus 550. Yeah.
Right. And that's what I meant. Didn't mean to be deceiving with that. But, a question here, though, what does bust mean here? Right. I mean, that's one of the things. Does it mean the Nittany Lions season can only be defined as success is if they win it all? Does it mean if they don't win it all, that Franklin's clearly not the right coach for Penn State and maybe they should go with someone else? I mean, what are we saying here? I just think because of Natty winning a national championship is so tough that it's pretty much false to say it's Natty or bust, just like last year for Ohio State. Last year, if Ohio State would have beat Michigan, made the playoffs, and beat 1 or 2 SEC teams along the way and even lost in a final, I think that would have been deemed as a successful season. People would have felt good. A little disappointing because ultimately the ultimate goal is not to just beat your rival. The ultimate goal is to win a title. I get that. But really, it wouldn't have been disappointing given Ohio State had some problems beating SEC teams consistently, right? They certainly needed to break the streak last year to Michigan. So, I think similar for Penn State this year. Let's say Penn State beats Ohio State. It'd be the only second time Franklin's done that in his tenure at Penn State. And then let's say they go on to beat another top 5 team in the playoffs, in addition to that Ohio State win, which certainly would probably be a top 5 win. Then they end up not winning the Natty. Wouldn't we say beating Ohio State, winning a top 5 team, especially if it were against an SEC team, I think you would say it's a pretty successful year for James Franklin, right? He'd be able to parlay that into saying we've made great progress. We're right there at the doorstep. It would enhance in recruiting. He would have a great story to tell. They just have to kind of take the next step. So I guess that is a storyline. I do think saying bust is an overstatement, but he does have to do well in some categories. He can't lose to Ohio State, make the playoffs, and then beat one, an SMU-like team and then lose again. That if he does, then that will look like a bust season, in my view.
Yeah, I'm with Fisherman here. Penn State is natty or bust to me because if they don't do it this year, when can they? I'm with Fisherman here. I mean, I'm not going to say they can't any other time, but this is their best opportunity they've had under James Franklin. Not only do you look at the team, but you look at the teams around them as well, right? Michigan has a freshman starting quarterback this year. Dante Moore is going to start this year for his second year, but he was at UCLA before, and that was a true freshman year. So this is not exactly his first year starting, but kind of like his first year starting. And then Ohio State's going to either have Julian Sayin, Lincoln Keen holds. I tend to believe it's going to be Julian Sayin, but that competition, I guess, is heating up compared to what some people said after practice today. We'll see what happens. But overall, I just think that Penn State right now, really their only team that is coming back with a whole lot of talent and a whole lot of experience, that championship level experience, is Clemson, right? I know there's other teams come back with experience, but those teams that are really favored to win it all, Clemson's in the top 6 on FanDuel or top 5. They're tied for 5th with Alabama at plus 1,100. So to me, I guess it's not bust in the sense of like James Franklin's fired if he doesn't win it, but it's bust in a sense. If I'm a Penn State fan, I don't know if I'm believing that this team can win a national championship if they don't do it this year.
Yeah, and I guess that's what part of my point is. There's ramifications. So do you say, okay, well, with this team, if he can't do it, then do you say we need to maybe look elsewhere, So, yeah, and everyone's opinion is different, right? For some people, they'd say absolutely if they don't win it, it's a bust. And I'm just giving, kind of Big Jeff's opinion and kind of the reasoning behind it. So fair enough, though. All right, so let's go to this is
there you go, number 3. I got it for you.
Number 3. So will Ryan Day and Ohio State break the Michigan 4-game losing streak and repeat his national champions, making it 3 in a row for the Big Ten? So this one's interesting. Who's the last team in the Big Ten to repeat? It's actually, JR, it's been 59 years since a Big Ten team. It was Michigan State, co-champions in 1965 and 1966. Now, Nebraska fans, remember, I love you. You repeated in 94 and 95 as part of the Big 8 conference, but you weren't part of the Big Ten. So I'm talking a Big Ten team winning it. So obviously, one thing that would make this huge, if Ohio State were to repeat, then Ryan Day would basically be considered the best coach in college football right now. He would supplant Kirby Smart. And that would be huge. If we have the best coach and best program in the country, that's even more reason to say the Big Ten is superior to the SEC. So that would be a big deal. And so, the other thing is you got the regular season opener for Ohio State against Texas. Very important for the perception of both. I actually think, though, ultimately what you do at the end of the year, if Ohio State makes the playoffs, beating SEC teams then will matter more ultimately with the way we look back at the season. Whatever happened against Texas won't matter that much if Ohio State does real well in the playoffs, right? That kind of mitigates that. But the other thing is, winning the Natty, while it's made Ryan Day a legend, basically took pressure off him. There's never a season where you don't have tremendous pressure at Ohio State. So breaking that 4-game losing streak, if he really wants to have all Ohio State fans say, yes, Ryan Day is awesome, he has to beat Michigan. He has to break that streak. The Natty is not good enough for all Ohio State fans to say, Ryan Day is as good as Urban Meyer, as an example, who won a Natty and, didn't lose to Michigan. So this is very important for him and still a major storyline. To be clear for Michigan fans, though, winning national championship means more than that, but it doesn't mean the game doesn't matter. It means a lot. It just means less than it used to. But to me, I get annoyed with the whole, well, with the new 12-team playoffs, it means games like that don't matter anymore. That's such an overstatement. They do matter less, though. They do, right? Because Ohio State last year and still managed to win it all. So Ryan Day's 1-4 against Michigan, needs to beat them really to solidify his legacy. But again, if Ohio State wins and we get the three-peat, that's huge for Big Ten versus SEC perceptions.
Yeah, Ohio State, Michigan on FanDuel right now. Ohio State at Michigan. Ohio State is favored by 5.5. Over under is set at 47.5 right now. It would have been way under last game if they play like that again. But I don't see that happening. I think both teams are going to have good offenses this year, so won't be another 23-point matchup or anything. But yeah, I mean that's what makes this rivalry against Ohio State and Michigan so great, right? Is you have conversations about what's more important, this rivalry game or the national championship. There is no other sport where this conversation is even entertained between two teams. Maybe there's a European soccer game that I don't know about that maybe that's entertained a little bit because of some of the way they do some of their championship stuff over there. But in American sports, there is no competition in a game that is as thought about or used or talked about as much as this game. And Ryan Day, I tend to believe he probably feels a little bit less pressure on himself to win this game, but leading up to it, I mean, he's going to start feeling the pressure and he's got to get it done at some point.
Big time for sure. Yeah. So let's go to number 4 biggest storyline of this year and keep into the theme of championships. So can Oregon and Dan Lanning break through and win the Ducks' first national title? So JR, that made me think, like, is Oregon the best program in the nation to have not won a national championship? And so I kind of researched this a little bit. Some other candidates thrown out there were Virginia Tech, West Virginia, South Carolina, and then even Wisconsin listed in the Big Ten, given some of the really good years they've had since Alvarez took over as coach, in the early 90s. But really, I do have to rank the Ducks as the best program not to have won it, right? They've been in 2 national title games, 2010 and 2014. They've had huge recruiting success, especially recently. Their 5-year average is about 7th in the nation on average. In the last 2 years, they've been 3rd and 5th best recruiting classes in the nation. And then just think about, they're doing everything acting like a blue blood except winning the title that a blue blood needs to do. And they have everything you need to do it. They have a strong young coaching staff led by Dan Lanning, ability to recruit nationally across all positions, amazing modern facilities, strong history of winning, financial resources, as we all know, to attract and retain talent with NIL. And then they're the trendy program with their cool uniform combos, right? So really, this year, the only thing going against them is they got a younger, inexperienced quarterback in Dante Moore. The prior 2 years, they had really seasoned transfers come in, Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix, right? So this one is a transfer, but he doesn't have nearly the level of experience as those two. But I really think in the next 5 years, they're going to get it done, especially with the level of recruiting that they have. But they have to do it, JR, to be put into that same category as an Ohio State or a similar category. I don't want to say same category. That would be unfair. But just, to be considered blue blood-like, at least, you got to win the one title at least.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm an Oregon fan, Ohio State is culprit number 1 for stopping them to get to that. Back in 2014, Marcus Mariota. Back in 2024, just last year, Ohio State. It's been tough for the Ducks. I think if they're going to get it done, they're going to get it done with Dan Lanning as their head coach. That doesn't mean that the next guy can't do it or anything. I just think Dan Lanning is the guy. I think Dan Lanning is a fantastic head coach. He does some things that I don't really like, like the diving in the pool and some of the recruiting stuff. I'm like, man, we don't need that, just get the players. But overall, he's a really good leader. He makes really good hires. You can tell the way he runs his program. He does not operate like a first-time head coach at all. You could tell that he was ready for this. He really went through everything, and I listened to him at media days talk about all the people he goes and gets advice from and everything else, and you can tell he himself is improving and growing as well as the team, everything, and he sets a great example for that. So I think Oregon gets it done at some point, but I would totally agree with you. Oregon is the best program out there in college football that has not won a national championship yet.
Yeah, and if they were to win it, it would be awesome because we would say it's not just one school winning all these, like Alabama was winning like so many of them for the SEC, right? I think it helps if Ohio State's the one always winning it or Michigan. That's not as good as if we spread it out to like a Penn State or an Oregon as well. So I think that's why it's important.
Totally. All right, number 5, Jeff.
All right, number 5 biggest storyline is new 5-star quarterback Bryce Underwood, the next Trevor Lawrence. If he is, that would make Michigan instant title contenders right now. And I really think it would prove Sherrone Moore is the right man for the job. So, when I said that, some people are like, what do you mean not right man for the job? Listening to podcasts and everything before that Ohio State game, man, Michigan fans really were questioning, do we have the right guy? He botched the quarterback situation. The defense was not playing nearly as good as they were the prior years, and yet they had all that talent, as we saw, from the NFL draft and later in the season, how they performed. So, I really do think if Bryce Young were to truly be that 5-star quarterback, and let me just say, if he struggles this year, I still think he's going to be really good. It would be unusual for him to be as good as Trevor Lawrence. So I'm not saying he needs to be Trevor Lawrence to prove he's a 5-star. That's not what I'm saying. But for Michigan to be true national title contenders, he needs to be something similar to a Trevor Lawrence. Because also the fact is that another big difference, Trevor Lawrence actually, won a national championship with Clemson in 2018, his freshman year, true freshman year. But he also had a really talented wide receiver group for Clemson, and Michigan doesn't have that. So their overall recruiting is excellent. Definitely have the type of defense that could win a national title this year, I would think. But, if he's this, then I think any of the questions that do we have the right long-term coach in Sherrone Moore, I think that would be answered in addition to Michigan benefiting from being contenders now. Because I can tell you this, they hate the fact that right after they won a title, Ohio State won, right? They try to mitigate Ohio State's championship as much as possible. And right now, Vegas feels Michigan's upside is quite high. So the FanDuel national title odds in the Big Ten, Michigan has the fourth best of any Big Ten team at plus 3,600 to win the national championship. So that tells me FanDuel, Vegas thinks their upside is quite high. So that's, to me, JR, the fifth biggest storyline is Michigan for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I know that I have some concerns about Sherrone Moore at Michigan. I know I think there were some Michigan fans that kind of agreed with me on that going into the Ohio State game, but then after they beat Ohio State, I think that was really good for Sherrone Moore. I think that kind of gave him the forgiveness for the first year, and so you've got people bought in. You still haven't bought into the defensive line, stuff like that. So I think people are still bought in there, but if Michigan comes out this year and if they win 9 games and they barely miss the playoffs, I think he'll be fine. But if they come out and only win 7 games in the regular season or only 8 games in the regular season again, even if he beats Ohio State, I think some of those Michigan fans start to question, is this the guy? We love that he's beating Ohio State, but at the end of the day, I think most Michigan fans would agree that's not the ceiling of this program. The ceiling of this program is national championships, and if Sherrone Moore isn't the guy that can get them there, go get somebody that can beat Ohio State and win national championships, or at the very least contend for national championships. With the amount of money that's put into this program and where they're at right now, that should be the goal, is to at the very least contend for national championships.
I totally agree. If they're a true blue blood, it's more than just beating Ohio State. If you're a blue blood, you're challenging and periodically winning national championships. That's the definition of what blue bloods do. So totally agree with that, JR.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, MKWY says, you guys remain fundamentally clueless. MKWY, you remain never actually saying anything in the chat or ever actually bring anything up. So I'm going to take that as we annoy you, and that's perfectly fine with me. Thank you for listening. Jeff, let's get to storyline number 6.
Would be nice to have a little context when you make a comment.
No, they don't like to give context, Jeff. They just like to come in here and say stuff. That's all they like. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, so storyline number 6. Is Illinois as good as Brett Bielema says they are, and will they make the playoffs? So, I wrote my article. I think if I was to hire a salesperson, Brett Bielema would be the man I'd want to be running my organization. I mean, he's carried the banner for not just Illinois, but for the Big Ten, and no one is touting his team and conference more than him. And why not, right? They're coming off a 10-3 season. Returning production, they have the most at 75% in the next 2 weeks. That's a key part of the statistics we'll be looking at as I make my predictions for records. They have an experienced third-year starting quarterback in Luke Altmaier. And then I have them as the second easiest Big Ten within conference schedule. They don't play Oregon, Penn State, or Michigan. So all that means, they're a good candidate for it. But not so fast, my friend, as Lee Corso would like to say. Let me just point out a couple things. Illinois statistically really played more like an 8-5 team last year than a 10-3. They were 5-1 in one-score games, and that's good because that shows good coaching. You know how to win close. But no, I mean, overtime to beat a bad Purdue team, come on, like that's not good. And total offense, they ranked 92nd in the nation, and this is out of 134 teams. And then defense, they were 68th in the nation. So I'm not saying they weren't a good team last year. All I'm saying is they were very fortunate, and it took good coaching to help with that fortune to be 10-3. But in order to go to the playoffs this year, they're going to need to be 10-2 because their schedule's not that good, right? They got the game at Duke, but it's Duke still, right? They're a basketball school who plays pretty good football. I don't think people are going to be going crazy over a win on the road at Duke. And so 10-2 is what it's going to take. And really that returning production, JR, it's just going to have to play way better. I know they return all those players, but based on stats, those players weren't playing that great. They were managing to find ways to win. Credit to that. But I think the other thing you'll find is teams that are winning one-score game, that doesn't always happen every year. Sometimes you see that reverse in certain years as well. So not saying they're going to be bad, not saying they're going to be good. You have to wait for next week really to get my predictions on that. But this is definitely a big storyline with all the play that Illinois is getting in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I think we helped contribute to it a little bit here at the Big Ten Huddle. We talked about Illinois early on as a team that was bringing back a lot of players. They were a team that obviously won 10 games last year. I don't know if playoff it should be the expectation for Illinois or not. I see some people picking them to go like 11-1. I think that's very optimistic, and I can see that happening. However, again, I think that's rather optimistic. I think 9 or 10 wins is probably more in the range of where to think for Illinois fans. And then also you have to consider, you're going to be in a lot of close games. I trust Brett Bielema, I trust Luke Altmaier, but close games can be kind of iffy. Ask Minnesota against Michigan last year. Ask Nebraska in that game against Ohio State when they had the ball placed. Now that wasn't at the end of the game, but that was at the end of the first half when that ball was placed incorrectly and it impacted if they got a first down or not. So I mean, stuff like that happens. It's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, if you can get out of those close games and pull ahead, that's what I think is the key for Illinois this season. I mean, among other keys, obviously, is to be more dominant and pull ahead from more teams. That way, you're not in a close game with Purdue or in a close game with Rutgers where you have to win on one of the last plays there to do that. Because in reality, a playoff team should not be going down to the wire with Rutgers and Purdue. Sorry, I'm not trying to disparage Rutgers and Purdue here, but if you're a playoff team, you should be able to beat those teams by multiple scores. It's just the way it is. So, yeah, good analysis there from you, Jeff, and I agree.
Yeah, and I like that. Before we jump to the next one, I think more dominant play to get ahead in games. And I think that's a big deal because as we learned from Ohio State, keeping your players fresher, if you're able to pull away from a team, you can play and rest more starters in the fourth quarter. That can really pay dividends late in the season. Because if not, it's risking more injuries and wearing down your team. So I think that's a great point there, JR. So, all right, let's go to number 7, biggest storyline of the season. Will Indiana and Curt Cignetti threaten to make the playoffs again, proving they are for real and they have changed the program's culture? I could just say, Indiana losing its college football program in D1 history. They hadn't won more than 8 games since 1967. So that's what made that 11-2 final record just so amazing. It was pretty shocking to media and fans alike. And it caused some people to say, how real is this, right? And I get it. I'm a statistician. If it happens once and you have a sample size of 1, you doubt it. You need to see it again for people to really believe Indiana was real last year and to believe that Indiana will be an ongoing potential threat to make the playoffs. So I just believe, last year, everyone pointed to their schedule. And it was true. Of their 9 Big Ten teams they played, only 2 had winning records. It was Michigan and Ohio State. The 7 others had losing Big Ten records. But they were beating the crap out of those people, and that's why they justifiably made the playoffs. But all that to say is it really is important. I'm not saying Cignetti needs to go to the playoffs, but they can't have like a 7-5 season, especially with that non-conference, because then really – they would have won 4-5 in the Big Ten. That will cause a lot of people to say, see, last year is kind of a fluke, So JR, to me, at least 8-4 this year is a requirement to solidify that and say that last year wasn't a joke. If they go 9-3, I think then there should be no question about that, right? Because this year's schedule is tougher for sure than last year's. So I just think for the program and from a recruiting perspective, national perceptions, and this is important to the Big Ten too, because that mid-tier, many would say the SEC's mid-tier is still better than the Big Ten's mid-tier. And Indiana could bolster the quote mid-tier for the Big Ten by proving they're for real. Thoughts on what do you think?
Yeah,
Jeff?
I mean, Indiana's been a huge reason why the Big Ten can start, actually talking about not just the best teams in the conference are on par with other, SEC teams and stuff like that, but the conference overall. I mean, quite frankly, there were too many bottom feeders in the Big Ten, and Indiana was one of them. But Netty came in there, he turned them into a playoff team year one, and I think that there are other teams that are near the bottom that deserve more credit as well. Just talked about Rutgers, but I think Rutgers is one of those teams under Greg Schiano. They're recruiting better. They're getting a better staff around their team. I think Greg Schiano is doing a really nice job with building that program up. I don't think they're going to be national championship contenders or playoff contenders regularly, but I could see. I mean, like last year, we said, hey, if Rutgers wins 9 games, they're going to get talked about and be in the top 25, possibly a top 20 team, and maybe they could sneak in around it there if it was a 16-team playoff or something like that. Now, unfortunately for Rutgers, they got into some trouble with injuries, but you're seeing Indiana shoot up there. You're seeing Illinois shoot up there. You're seeing teams that you were not relying on to shoot up there. Now you just need Washington to be Washington. You need Oregon to be Oregon. You need USC to flex a little bit more muscle and get better. And then UCLA will pop up every now and then and do some stuff and probably be a top 25 team somewhat regularly. You get that. There's no doubt the Big Ten is just as good, if not better, than the SEC. And Indiana, Netty is a huge reason why that statement can even be uttered and talked about right now.
Those are awesome points. I don't have anything to add to that, JR. That was really good.
I'm killing it. Let's just move on to storyline number 8. Here we
go. Yeah. In all seriousness, yeah. Well, just well said. Yeah, but you captured it.
You you can get me on a roll. If you start talking good about Indiana, you can get me on a roll, so don't worry. You ever want me on a roll, just bring up Indiana, and I'll start saying nice things about them.
Well, let's go to number 8 here, because sticking in Indiana, which Big Ten teams could surprise like last year's Indiana team and make the playoffs? And I list the best candidates there. I'm going to talk about that. All those candidates are not likely to be top 25 preseason, I'm assuming. But here's something annoying to me, though, JR. We're getting a lot of questions of who will be this year's Indiana, and that is a dumb question, because Indiana, as I said in the opening, they came out of nowhere. They were 2-10 the prior year to make the playoffs. The only candidate in the Big Ten to be this year's Indiana is Purdue, because they went 1-11. Beyond Purdue, the worst record in the Big Ten was 4-8 last year. And that was Maryland and Northwestern. That wasn't as bad, as crazy as Indiana coming from nowhere. So it's really a better question to ask, who's kind of that surprise team more from the mid-tier? And I chose those 5 that you see there. So Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, and USC. All 4 of those have
Washington.
Well, yeah, but those 4 have an over. Oh, sorry. Yeah, USC, Nebraska, Iowa, and Washington. Those 4 have a FanDuel over and under of 7.5 this year, which is a pretty good number. It's within striking distance of saying, hey, maybe if we do real well, we could go 10-2, right? The only one of those 5, Minnesota, has 6.5 over under wins, but I still include Minnesota in there just because PJ's flex consistency. So really, those teams are right up there. If you want to talk about, national title odds of those 5, USC has the best national title odds at plus 7,500. And then Nebraska is next at plus 17,000. So that's a kind of a big drop off. But really, both those schools, USC and Nebraska, have average 4-year recruiting classes in the top 25. So I think they've got kind of the bench and the depth potentially where they could make that run, because depth is an important factor here for all these teams. Otherwise, you have to go pretty injury-free. Like Indiana had good fortune without a lot of injuries last year, to be frank. So all those other teams not mentioned here, they all have over-unders from FanDuel of 5.5 wins or less. So really, that would be a much harder pull. But I think those 5 candidates you see here, there really would be viable to have that, quote, surprise and be similar to Indiana and make a playoff.
Yeah, when we did this and talking about Indiana, we talked about, bottom 5 teams in the Big Ten in terms of the odds. I believe that was Rutgers, Northwestern, Purdue, Maryland, and there was one other team in there.
UCLA is probably on the
UCLA, the other one, yeah. And unfortunately, all of those teams just have really difficult schedules. I mean, if you're talking about a team that has the schedule that can catapult them to 9-3, 10-2 this season, and they also have the talent to do it, and I'm not saying that these teams don't have that. I'm just saying the schedule favors for that to happen for one of these teams. It's Nebraska. Nebraska is the team with the most favorable schedule among these five that you've have in your storyline here. Now, Iowa has the consistency, so if they can just win that extra game or two, I mean, I have them at 8-4 right now. I think 8-7 wins is pretty safe floor for Iowa pretty much every year with what Kirk Ferentz is bringing there. But if Tim Lester's really able to get it going and Mark Gronowski is really, the guy that some Iowa fans are talking about he can be, then they could get to 9-10 wins. USC could get to 9-10 wins. I mean, it's kind of like a cluster of odds, and I think that's one of the reasons why you don't have a fourth team with the playoff odds up there, is because you have all of these teams in the middle that if you had one less conference game, they probably would get some more respect at the very least in the top 25, maybe even getting into the the playoff consideration and stuff. So all five of these teams can make the playoffs, in my opinion. Minnesota probably the least likely one because of Drake Lindsey, young quarterback, but I like the offensive line. I like the running backs there. USC, they got to figure out some of their woes the past couple years, but they definitely were able to do it. 3 years ago or 2 years ago? In Lincoln Riley's first year, they almost won if it wasn't for the Caleb Williams injury. But yeah, that's what I got there. So.
Well, speaking of USC and Nebraska, let's go to number 9 here, JR, because that's the next one. Can two Big Ten Blue Bloods, so that's USC and Nebraska, can they start acting like that and take positive steps, show that they can be consistent? So when I say for you to act like a Blue Blood, you should be consistently top 15 like team, maybe top 10, and a playoff threat pretty much every season. Not making the playoffs necessarily every season, but always threatening that. And that's what we need from USC and Nebraska, again, to really help say we are better than the SEC, right? To add to kind of like the mid-tier becomes a high mid-tier where we've got a bunch of teams that are making the playoffs or just barely missing out on it. Nebraska has been missing in the action for most of this century. This is crazy. Their last top 10 finish was 2001 under Frank Solich. They went 11-2 that year, finished 8th. Both schools have coaches who have proven D1 success. I think what's really interesting about Nebraska, they have Dylan Raiola, right? 5-star quarterback, and it's often your second year starting that you make that big leap. If he does, that could really help them act blue blood-like. And the other thing is Matt Rule, if you look at his year 3 in his past 2 jobs, Temple, he's actually seen in the last 2 jobs, he's seen an increase in 4 wins over his second year in the job. So at Temple, his second year, he went 6-6. The next year, he went 10-4. At Baylor, his second year, he went 7-6. And then his third year, he won 11-3. That's a leap of 4. If the Huskers, who went 7-6 last year, JR, increased by 4 wins, they're 11-2. Let's just call that 10-2 or whatever. If you build that out basically they're a playoff team is what I'm saying. If he makes a similar leap with Nebraska, like he did for Temple and Baylor, Nebraska is a playoff team. So that's pretty enticing. And their recruiting, like I mentioned just previously, is pretty good. And then if you look at USC, they had a bunch of games where they lost by 1 point, right? They led in the fourth quarter 4 or 5 times and end up losing that game. And then let's remind Lincoln Riley, he was top 10 in all 5 years he was at Oklahoma. I mean, consistently in the playoffs 3 times, right? He didn't go far or win a Natty, but if you're making the playoffs, you're a damn good coach and he knows how to do it. So, to me, this is a big storyline. And again, it would be huge for the Big Ten to tout that they're better than the SEC if these team gets back to their blue blood ways.
I say get them back to the blue blood ways and get 5 teams in the playoffs. I love it. Let's go to the last storyline here, Jeff. Storyline number 10. Give it to us.
Final ones, guys. What Big Ten coaches will get fired this year? So I list 4 candidates. Mike Locksley from Maryland, Wisconsin's Luke Fickell, Northwestern's David Braun, and USC Lincoln Riley. Last year only Ryan Walters got let go. He went 1-11. It was a disaster season. I actually think Locksley clearly of Maryland is the number one candidate. He said during Big Ten Media Days he lost his locker room. If he loses the locker room again, they're not going to have a very good season. How do you keep a coach if they lose it again, or if he admitted that and they have another bad year? So I put him number one. I think Luke Fickell, they have a brutal schedule. And the other thing to remind is the athletic director of Wisconsin is Chris McIntosh. He hired Fickell. He wants to see him successful. So I think the key is as long as Wisconsin looks competitive, it looks like their new offense and new offensive coordinator has their offense improved and looking better, I think Fickell will be safe. And then the same thing for Lincoln Riley. They're recruiting much better. They have a new staff assigned to that. As long as Maeva looks like he's progressed as a quarterback, I think he's safe as well. But those are the four. I really would be surprised if more than one of these. And again, Locksley is the number one candidate for this in my book.
Yeah, it's there's kind of like a storyline here for each one of these guys, so we don't have time to go through each and every one of them. Maybe we'll have to dedicate a segment to it at some point. But yeah, I mean, as far as Luke Fickell and Lincoln Riley, their buyouts are too big. They're not getting fired after this year unless something really, really goes wrong. And you see Wisconsin go like 3-9 or 4-8, and USC like doesn't make a bowl game. Then maybe you could see something happen, but the buyouts are just too big. And like I say, something happened. I don't even know if that's like they fire him. Maybe they figure something else out, a deal, or I don't know. But I don't think either of those guys are really in danger with the buyouts. And Luke Fickell just got an extension last year as well. So and they believe in the culture, they believe in the recruiting. I kind of have a rule with coaches. I think coaches get rid of a coordinator at least once before they go, and David Braun hasn't gotten rid of a coordinator yet, so I think he's still got his card there to play. And I think if Northwestern doesn't have a very good season this year, I think that'll probably happen with Zach Lujan if it is the offense's issue. And then Mike Locksley, it was really eye-opening, really enlightening when Zach talked to Larry about him and just kind of how much he means to that Maryland program. If you don't remember, they had a player die under DJ Durkin there in practice, and Mike Locksley really was the one that came in and kind of brought that team back to the local recruiting scene and really kind of established connections again, because people didn't trust Maryland after that, and understandably so. It was a local kid that happened to, unfortunately, and people lost a lot of trust. But Mike Locksley was able to come in. He started off bad, but after COVID, he improved his record each year. I think if Maryland goes 4-8 or 5-7 this season, it's a young team. I think people are going to understand Mike Locksley a little bit more, and they're going to give him at least one more year. Unless Mike Locksley goes like 3-9 or 2-10, it's just an absolute disaster. I think the people see the talent that's on this team, and they have the good feelings about what he's done for the program, and I think Mike Locksley sticks around. So that was my bold prediction, is that nobody would get fired after this season. That's my bold prediction.
I can see it, because I think for Locksley, it's similar to Wisconsin. If they still look good, the young quarterbacks they have look good, right, and everything, even if the wins aren't that great, you don't want a new coach. I mean, that sets your program back 2 years. It's very untypical what Cignetti did. That it's easier to get back on track faster, but it's still not easy, right? So
and we have to consider how much these programs require, extra revenue and everything now with the, revenue sharing. I know everybody wants to act like the revenue sharing isn't a big deal. There are programs this is a big deal for, that they're able to pay recruits money or players money from their, from the school. So this is a thing for them. And if you fire a coach, that's going to put you in the red for at least a few years. It's going to make it harder for you to even pay players. So if you fire a coach, it's not going to exactly be the most attractive thing in the world for another coach to come into. I think we're going to see some less firings in college football now than we have previously, and I think it's evidence of you don't really hear a whole lot of talk. Like Billy Napier last year was going to get fired. Now you don't really hear any talk about Billy Napier getting fired. There's some people that put him on the hot seat, but then Florida fans are like, no way, we love Billy. And it's like, okay. And I think a lot of that is driven from behind the scenes stuff with boosters and everything that see the numbers and they're like, yeah, we can't afford to pay these guys $20 million and fire this coach.
Yeah. And it always comes down to, are you confident you could get someone else who definitely could do better?
Very
And
true.
often it's like, well, we're not sure, then why not
Yeah.
stick with your guy unless it was a disaster, right? So, yep.
Yeah. All right, Jeff. I think that was a lot of good storylines. Good episode there. Appreciate you coming on and doing that. Appreciate everybody being in the chat. A lot of good chatter today. Sorry we didn't get to the chat as much today as we normally do, but definitely appreciate everybody being here. Jeff, tell people where they can find your articles at and everything before we get out of here.
Yeah, just remember, full write-up on this was on bigjeffsfootball.com. It's already out there for you. And then please follow me on X, Big Jeffs FT Ball. And you can see in the bottom right here on X, and I appreciate it.
And remember, the articles are always linked there in the description. Please do like the episode before you head out of here. We appreciate that. Great stuff, fellas. Good night. Thanks, everybody. Billy says thanks all. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.